Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for being here. Happy Friday to all of those joining us today. We'll get started in just about one more minute for everyone hopping on. And while you're waiting, feel free to grab your lunch, a beverage, and sit back and enjoy. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Asian Pacific American Systemwide Alliance, APASA, I'd like to welcome you all to the APASA Fireside Chat with President and CEO of UCSF Health, Suresh Gunasekaran. My name is Darlene Mergelano, and I'm one of the co-chairs of APASA, and I'm so grateful for my co-chair, Peter Weber, and the rest of our steering committee for organizing today's event. I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge our amazing APASA Steering Committee for their dedication, energy, and hearts. Melissa Bautista, Tiffany Chan, Diana Kim, Wiley Liu, Maria Hauchico, Alvin Ozawa, Michelle Tang, and Eva Wang Moy. They say it takes a village, and I'm grateful to be a part of this one. A special recognition today goes out to Tiffany Chan, Diana Kim, Wiley Liu, and Michelle Tang for all of their efforts in organizing today's event. As we get closer to the end of May, I'd like to highlight and uplift our community as we celebrate AAPI Heritage Month. This month is full of campus-wide events to celebrate the AAPI community, and we look forward to continuing to uplift one another, celebrate our culture, our traditions, our similarities, our differences, and our heritage. Once again, I thank you all for being here today, and I'd like to now turn things over to my co-interviewer and APASA Steering Committee member, Diana.
Thank you, Darlene. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Kim, and I'm one of the APASA Steering Committee members. I'm so pleased to be here today as we interview our new president and CEO of UCSF Health, Suresh Gunasekaran, as we celebrate API Heritage Month. Today's event is a continuation of last year's API Heritage Month events, where we hosted our inaugural UCSF API Leadership Panel. I'm so thrilled that Suresh is here today to continue that tradition. Suresh has over 20 years of experience as a seasoned healthcare administrator and IT professional. He has worked at large medical centers across the country, such as University of Iowa, University of Texas Southwestern, and the Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt. As we celebrate API Heritage Month, this is a time of the year when we can sit back and reflect on our culture, our legacy, our language and food, and our identities as members of the API community. A large part of our identity is our name, and I want us all to proclaim our names loud and proud, whether it may be a short and simple one, or whether it may be a long and challenging one that may be even difficult for your friends and colleagues to pronounce. Suresh, I know your name is not one that's challenging at all. I'm just curious if you know the meaning behind your name. We investigated the origins a little bit before this event, and just curious if you know the meaning of your name.
Sure. Suresh is actually an extremely common name in India, and the root of it is based on the sun, like the sun god or the sun in the sky. And so the uniqueness of the name is that India is so many different cultures and languages that all have melded and integrated over the generations. It's one of the names that's not regionally specific. You find people with that name from across the country, north, south, east, and west. Whereas my last name, Gunasekaran, has some similarities to other regions, but it's particularly only found in the very southern part of the state. And so my parents were first generation immigrants that came from South India in the 60s. And I was born in the United States, but that's the name background.
Thank you. Can you tell us, going back a little bit to the beginning, about your own personal career journey and kind of what has motivated you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my career journey was, framed, on the back of a lot of disappointment. The reason I'm allowed to be at an AAPI meeting is because, like most of us, there were significant expectations around what we should do and what a proper career should be, and those kinds of things. And so, like any good person in my family, it was the goal was to be a doctor or bust. And along the way, it was modified, like you could be a doctor or an engineer or bust. But I was fully bust. From a college standpoint, I liked political science, I liked philosophy, I liked art history. I went to school at Vanderbilt University. My career journey actually started at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, where I was the clinic manager of a very small resident clinic. And then over a period of time, I had expanded responsibilities over a broader set of clinics. And early in my career, I was Vanderbilt at the time was one of the very first customers on a scheduling system from a small software company in Madison, Wisconsin called Epic Systems. And so for me, that became an influence in my career to get involved in that Epic system implementation. And then ultimately, for a while, a career in IT that spanned living in the Bay Area about 20 years ago and being an IT consultant in the healthcare industry, and then ultimately becoming the head of IT at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. And I did IT there 10 years, did the full Epic implementation and new IT implementation for a new hospital and those things, and transitioned to being the COO at the university at UT Southwestern before I left there to be the CEO at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, where I was for 4.5 years before I came here.
With just that rich history, I wonder, with your career trajectory, how do you think your heritage has shaped the person you are today, whether that be professionally or perhaps Anne personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my heritage defines me in so many ways. I mean, I think the way that I look at the world is very much a reflection on the values and traditions of where my parents came from. But I think, like a lot of immigrant families, the heritage hits the reality of America. And I think the aspects that I really draw from my heritage is the importance of family. I think that Asian cultures as a whole have not just I think all cultures have an importance on family. I think that Asian cultures have a particular approach to family traditions and family rituals and family structure it's at times rigid, but in any times it's always really important. And so I constantly think about my family, and a lot of when I think about hospitals, and especially starting at a children's hospital, you don't just think about the patients, you think about their families too, and what everyone is going through. And so to me, my heritage really dictates how I see the world, and how folks are really connected in the community. Obviously, I think that they're from a family background and from a heritage standpoint, I think there's always an importance on the value of education. So it's not surprising to me that my dad worked for a university, that I have pretty much only worked for university medical centers my whole career, because I think that the value of being in an educational environment and the honor of being able to teach or train or mentor people, or the ability to continuously learn, are things that I think that I really bring from my heritage. And the third part of it is that, coming from an Indian background, I think that, my father was born into an India which was still a British colony. And my father arrived to the United States before the Civil Rights Act was passed. So he got to be born into a society in which he didn't have full rights. And then he got to come to America, where my father actually arrived in Texas to do his PhD. And he didn't realize that he thought it was weird that you always had to go to the back of a restaurant to get to the food. And he thought that's weird. It took him a little while to figure out that it was him that needed to go to the back, not everyone else. And I think it's just an interesting journey to always know the value of being true to yourself, about being fair to one another, and this notion that you need to fight, and you need to work hard at really belonging. And and I think that that's something you can't take for granted. And I think that looking at it in kind of that cultural lens has always guided me too.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's really amazing to think in one generation you had a parent who was getting food at the back of the restaurant to now his son, who is the CEO of a leading academic medical center. So I think that's really impressive. Can you tell us a little bit more about an accomplishment that you're extremely proud of? I know you've only been at UCSF for a couple of months, so perhaps something from one of your previous roles, but a time that you're really proud of.
I think that when you do these jobs that are so management oriented, and you look back at the things that you're most proud of, I don't think I have any accomplishments that I'm really proud of what I accomplished. I think the things that I'm really proud of is what we were able to accomplish as a team. And so when I look back, probably I'm getting old and I don't remember these things, but I remember being really proud of how we converted off of paper clinic schedules at Vanderbilt. And we started using computers for scheduling, and you didn't have to call around the clinics and find out who had what on what paper book. And I was really proud of that. And then in Dallas, I was really proud that we decided to expand our indigent care clinics into predominantly Hispanic underserved communities. And we had the courage to recruit staff that were not just bilingual, but really could meet the needs of that community where they were, and how much those clinics were embraced by the community. I think that made me really proud. And in Iowa, I think we were really proud of our pandemic response, which in many ways was a lot like UCSF's, where instead of waiting for other people to help us and our patients out, we took it upon ourselves to step up and help our patients, our staff, and the community as a whole. And I think that was something that we were really proud of. But when I reflect across my career, I can't really think of anything I've done, but I can certainly think of a lot of things that we've done.
I'd say being the new leader of an internationally recognized health system is definitely an accomplishment. But back to your point with just that, your collaborative nature, I think speaking for the APASA Steering Committee, I think that's something we're trying to work on too, is just recognizing the accomplishments and victories along the way, whether it's big or small. And sometimes it's, we're so quick to notice what are all the things we could have done differently for an event, and perhaps we'll debrief that later today as well. But it's also the importance of just, acknowledging and uplifting the victories that come along the way. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. Keeping that in mind, and in your identity as one of the few API leaders, across the country, have there been times when you've been conscious of your identity and race, ethnicity, and how have you navigated that? Or perhaps what advice would you have for folks just trying to navigate that?
At different times, I would actually say, it's interesting. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, And I actually grew up at a time when the United States immigration policy was a little bit different. So when I was growing up and I'd tell someone that I was Indian, they would ask me what tribe I was, because it wasn't until I was in like high school that the immigration policy changed for skilled workers. And then you suddenly had like tons of Indian immigrants coming in and some of these things, Asian immigrants of various different countries. It was a much smaller Asian community when I was growing up, from all across the AAPI regions. There wasn't a single kind of Asian influence, except for like on the West Coast in San Francisco. But I grew up in Nashville. And so I've always had a background feeling of not being like everyone else. So I think that was as long as I can remember, being born in Memphis, Tennessee, and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, I think I've always understood that. And so by the time I got into the workforce and into leadership, that wasn't anything new. And so by that point, you're kind of used to it. But in leadership, I think that what I have found most startling is the last couple of years of increased violence towards members of the Asian and Asian American community. I think that this notion of, as we've seen more and more discussion around recruitment and retention of various different populations, I feel like sometimes being an invisible minority of Asians, because we're successful on certain metrics, allows other types of metrics to not be looked at. And so I think that, for me, it's just this notion that if you want to advance belonging, you have to fight for it. You can't take it for granted. And I think those have been the moments over the years that I really reflect on when it comes to leadership.
Because you mentioned the ongoing events these last couple of years, we wanted to ask, with those kind of hate-filled actions towards Asians, how do you show support to the API community, both internally and externally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's the responsibility of leadership. I think the first part is you got to show up, and I think that for me, I've been rounding over the first 10 weeks here that I've been at UCSF Health, and it goes without saying that we couldn't run this place without the members of the Asian American community. I mean, you could not run this place. And I think that showing up and being supportive of those issues, of that identity, of heritage is really, really important. And for folks to feel as though they are heard, they feel like they are valued, and that they have a bright future here is a responsibility of my job. And I take it very, very seriously. I think that the other piece of it that's really important, and I've certainly not been able to do it in 10 weeks of being here in the Bay Area, is that we have a responsibility to partner with those organizations in our community that are lifting up these voices, that are providing opportunities to those that are disadvantaged. And, the Asian community is one of those. And I think that for me, those are the two main areas that come with, being a leader.
Thank you for mentioning that and recognizing the API community here at UCSF. As you know, and as you've seen, the API community makes up a large proportion of the workforce. We're almost 40% of the larger UCSF community. Yet when you look at the API membership, or the number of API members at the staff entry-level frontline positions, and then you look at the more senior level management, there's a significant decrease in the number of API leadership here at UCSF. What are your thoughts on the gaps between our large API workforce ratio to the number of the API senior managers, so those at the N3 level and higher?
I think the future looks bright for UCSF, honestly. Look at the people that I'm on this Zoom with. I think there is a generation of leaders that are rising. And but the question is still valid and the data is still valid. I think that we have to accept the facts, which are that there is this discrepancy. We have to be thoughtful about why this discrepancy is there. And there are multiple reasons for it. But the part that I think that I'm most interested in is what can we do to develop our own leaders internally? If we already have individuals within our organization, and many of them have a growth mindset, what can UCSF Health do to grow our own leadership? And so that's what's most interesting to me. And I think that it's helpful that we have this large of a community already in the workplace, which means that we are prepared to hopefully meet our community where they are, especially when it comes to our Asian community. However, as we think about leadership, I think it's a lot about development and creating development opportunities that allow high potential and developing leaders to grow within our organization.
Well, do you have any specific ideas as you get started here? And I know you've only been here for 10 weeks, but any specific ideas of what we can do to support professional development for the API community if they are interested in moving up the career ladder?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things I would say is that some things are community specific and some things are not community specific. I think the opportunity to increase leadership development is true across all of UCSF Health. And that the mere fact that we have such a large proportion of AAPI colleagues simply means if focusing on the whole population, there will be several of our community leaders also moving up through that path. I don't think it requires unique training or unique competencies. I think that we need to make it more abundant. It needs to have principles where we can help people develop outside of the departments and units that they're in. I think that's another thing that's stifling leadership development. If everyone's waiting for their boss to retire or take another job, we can't promote people every 17 years. We need greater opportunities for people to be more mobile within the organization to achieve their career development goals, and for us to allow people to switch lanes during their career to take advantage of those opportunities. But I also think that there are some difficult conversations that we have to have around implicit bias, some difficult conversations that we have to talk about in terms of how we treat one another as colleagues, that just does not make this organization feel as inclusive as it needs to. It's hard to develop within an organization if you don't feel like you're being heard, if you don't feel like you're being treated with respect, you feel like the effort that you're putting in is not valued. And I think that we have to accept that we have gaps. The data shows we have gaps amongst our African-American employees, our Hispanic employees, various different groups. And I think that it's the Asian community is certainly one of those as well. But we also need to, unless we can address broader issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it'll be difficult for us to advance these goals for any specific group.
Suresh, I wanted to take a step back of what you were touching upon with just, growing up in Tennessee and having lived in Texas and Iowa, and perhaps you could speak a little bit about how just the different environments that you've been in have shaped your identity, both as, a healthcare executive and leader, and just as a person of color.
It's really hard to pinpoint the regional pieces of it. I always say the most difficult environment was growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was not so much about Nashville. It was the United States in the late 70s and 80s. I think that's a different world. And as much as we are so acutely aware of the challenges that we continue to have in our society with systemic racism and the continued unrelenting torrent of hate crimes, Buffalo most recently, but there are individual events every single day in every single city of the United States. It still, to me, was a different time in the 80s, and far more difficult to be a minority in Tennessee when I was growing up, and far fewer voices to ally with. And I just think that that's always shaped me. I think I have always understood what it's like not to be like everyone else. I think I've always understood how much harder you have to work some days to be listened to or taken seriously. I think that I, however, have had significant privilege. My parents were always able to provide me opportunities that made it easier to overcome some of these things. And so a lot of my experience has been the tremendous privilege that I have in accepting the fact that all in our community and all in the United States not have the same opportunities that I did, and that didn't have the same support structure that I did, and didn't get to work for organizations like I did, didn't get to go to school where I did. And so I think that when I reflect on my journey, I think that reflecting on the privilege that I've had to overcome some of these systemic obstacles is also something that I always keep in mind.
Thank you for that, Suresh. And speaking for myself as someone who also grew up in an area where folks didn't look like me, I've personally found that mentorship, whether it was formal or informal, was and has been helpful for me. And I wonder, perhaps, who is someone or someones that you've had that have had tremendous impact to you as a leader?
There are just too many to name. In fact, I would say that my entire career story has been just a journey of numerous mentors. Some, most often my boss, but quite often others. And it would be really hard for me to pick out any one of them, I guess. But part of the attractiveness of even coming to UCSF is the ability to work for Chancellor Hoggood. I think he's a tremendous leader and is very compelling in his vision of what UCSF can do for the Bay Area, the state, the nation, the world. But on a personal level, just like the Chancellor, I think that, early in my career, I had a mentor who was a physician leader at Vanderbilt, who really taught me that you can run the business of healthcare and still do the right thing. And, very early in my career, I think that I started thinking through the reality of you can still run a business, make money, and still treat your employees well. And you still can treat your patients well. And you can make decisions based on what's going to create the best outcome for a patient, or what's going to make an employee feel most supported. And that it's not about maximizing the bottom line. It's about helping people. And I think that was a really impactful mentor on me in terms of how I think about why I work in this industry and why I work for the kinds of organizations that I've been able to.
Thanks, Suresh. Mentorship is such an important part, but also so is sponsorship. We were wondering if there has been someone in your life or in your career journey that has provided that sponsorship for you. In addition, what do you recommend for the audience today to go about assembling their advisory board or board of directors, those around them who can guide them and teach them and lead them along the way?
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have many sponsors. The interesting thing that I would say is that just the nature of my career all the way through, I don't think I've had a single sponsor of color. The interesting piece of this for me is that when I look at those individuals that have most impacted my career, both in terms of sponsorship and advice, that the entirety of them have been people that are not leaders of color. And it's not unusual in my generation to have that experience because there weren't many other individuals of color to model yourself after. And so the first rule I would say is when you're assembling your board of directors or your sponsors, I think that finding those leaders that are going to take a personal interest in you and have the bandwidth to support you and are willing to think creatively with you about your goals, that should be your standard. You shouldn't pick Suresh because, man, he looks like me, or his name's the exact same number of letters as me, or, some of those things. It's more of a more individual or personal connection. And that allows you to have the access to that person's thinking, which is really the most valuable part of the sponsorship process or the advice process.
What advice do you give to your own mentees and people you sponsor or have sponsored along the way?
I give a lot of advice. I don't know how much of it is good advice. So we'll try some on for size. The main thing that I talk about is finding real purpose in the work that you do. I think it's really, really important to identify within yourself, why is it that you work for UCSF Health? And why do you work in this specific division in the Department of Medicine? And why are you trying to advance your career? And the more you can understand about your own motivation, then you can figure out what skills you need to advance your goals. And to me, I always tell folks, if you know what you want to do ultimately, don't worry so much about what you're doing today or tomorrow or the next day. I always knew that I wanted to help patients and I wanted to help kids. But if you look at my career, it was never very linear. I started as a clinic manager. Then I moved into the billing system, business office. Then I moved into IT. Then I moved into IT analyst work. Then I moved into IT consulting. And then I moved to into running an IT department, to then being a COO. You're catching the drift here. It's like it was a very windy road. Never did I ever say, I would really like to be the CEO of something. In fact, I only in the last 5-6 years did it even dawn on me that I might be interested in such a leadership career. But the whole time, what was kind of on my mind is I want to work for an academic medical center because the clinical expertise is so significant, yet none of those places really care about money. And what I really did was use each stage in my career to learn new skills and learn from great leaders about how you make a difference. And so the advice that I really give people more than anything is, as you're growing your career, be flexible. Really try to think of what's the impact that you can make while focusing on learning or while you're doing it. And so that's the core of what I usually tell folks.
Thank you. I know you've only been here just a couple weeks, couple months, but in your short time here, what do you identify as that will be your biggest challenge facing you and the rest of your leadership team here at UCSF?
It's still early to tell, but obviously there are so many great things about UCSF. Just the truly phenomenal medical school, the truly phenomenal other health profession schools. Our health system does such a great job seeing so many different patients across so many different campuses. The tremendous work that the team has done during the pandemic and through today. But it's also obvious that we got challenges, and within UCSF Health, you can see the growing pains. We've grown so much. We see so many more patients today. We see them in so many different locations. And many days the workload just seems really, brutal. It's really stifling, and it's difficult to get done what we want to get done for our patients and what we want to get done for our colleagues. And so I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, is how can we operate this organization that's really triple the size that it was just 10 years ago. And we can do it. If you look at all the progress we've made in the last decade, there's no reason we can't have the same kind of progress in the next decade. But today, I think our biggest challenge is really going to be, how do we get through these growing pains and kind of really get into a stable situation where we can handle being as big of a health system as we are and serving as many patients as we do.
You know, just with all of that, I can imagine that, you know, stress definitely comes within the territory. And so I wonder, how do you manage stress, or, you know, protect yourself from or recover from being overwhelmed or burnout?
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's really different. I mean, again, my privilege is that I don't have to come staff a nursing unit, and I don't have to, you know, work in a clinic, and I don't have to do some of these things where, you know, there is a significant amount of workload, and either enough people showed up to do that or not, or systems or processes are easy or not. And so I know it's quite a bit different when we talk about burnout from the frontline staff, whether you're seeing patients or supporting team members that do, it's just different. And then during a pandemic, when everybody else gets to work from home, but you got to come in and do your work on site because that's where the patients are, and that's what we've got to do. It's different. So each one of these things are different. In my role, I always say I don't feel that much stress. I just feel a tremendous responsibility on my shoulders, that we have a responsibility to the community to do those things that UCSF Health is best doing. And when we don't do that, lots of patients get turned away. Lots of patients don't get the optimal care that they need. Lots of patients, we're their only hope because other providers won't see them. And so I feel a lot of responsibility for us to continue to serve the broad purpose of helping the Bay Area community. And I feel a lot of responsibility that we need to get that right. At the same time, I feel an equal responsibility to the tens of thousands of workers that make up our colleagues, that are all busting their hump, that are all trying to do the right thing. And on top of this, you know, really do this to support their families and to make sure that they have a good life and a good future. And so to me, the major responsibilities on my shoulders are really to make sure that we really have the impact on the community that we only can, and at the same time, make sure that we really take care of our employees and make it a place where they feel like they have a bright future, and hence their families have a bright future. And so that's where my exhaustion comes from, quite honestly, is more than it is stress. But at least that's how it is today.
Thank you for talking about the staff and the workers. We just recently finished the staff engagement survey. And it's been interesting in the last couple of years. There have been different comments coming from the survey. On one hand, we've heard senior leadership say at a recent staff engagement survey focused town hall, saying that the data shows Asians are particularly comfortable with the UCSF work environment. On the other hand, we've also heard from our API colleagues that they don't feel safe, they don't feel heard, they have challenges advancing their careers. What are your thoughts on these contrasting statements, and kind of what can we do better to capture or address these concerns, as they're quite different?
Yeah, I would push on you a little bit and say they're not mutually exclusive. You know, our goal isn't just only to make our employees feel safe. I mean, you know, the goal here isn't to just make sure as long as employees feel safe, we're done. No, I mean, we want our employees to be thriving. And what the data is saying is, compared to other groups, our Asian employees are not reporting feeling unsafe. And so that's one data point. So from a safety standpoint, that's there. But from a different standpoint, we did not get data saying our Asian colleagues feel like they're really thriving and that this is a place where they're optimistic about their career development and they feel like there are great opportunities to move into management. And we also accept that as well. And so what I would say is that we see the difference. And our goal is not simply to make sure that people feel safe, which we need to, but it's ultimately to feel like we are an employer of choice. I always say this internally to my team. My goal is that everybody wants to retire here, that this is the place that you want to be long-term. You know, you can go work for someone else for a little while, only to come back and realize we're still the best long-term partner. We may not have the best parking, but we are still the best long-term partner for you in your career. And we've got work to do if we want to earn that right. And I very much think we have to earn the right and re-earn the right all the time to keep our employees, because our employees are super talented. They have other options, easier commutes, you know, and we continue to hold ourselves accountable to do better.
Thank you for that, Suresh. And I want to be mindful of the time as we see questions coming in the Q&A. So we'll turn it over to Q&A shortly. But Diana and I have one last question. And, you know, food is an integral part of our culture. And speaking for the APASA Steering Committee, we're constantly talking about food and planning our next meals. If you were to come and attend an APASA potluck, what dish would you bring and why?
Oh, wow. I would love to eat at any potluck. We're just going to expose my absolute lack of culinary talent. If my mom were to cook and I were to bring something, I would probably bring an uttapam. And so that is in the same family of a dosa. If you've heard of that, it's like a crepe style thing from South India, but the uttapam is a thicker version. So it looks more like a pancake consistency. And I would be pretty pleased with that. Although an Asian American Pacific Islander potluck would be pretty impressive. So I wouldn't worry too much about what I brought. I would focus on getting there on time and being able to eat everything else.
We're definitely inviting you to the next one, Suresh.
Your mom can come too.
Oh, cool.
And we also heard that sushi is your favorite, so we can make sure sushi is there as well.
Without a doubt.
All right, well, now I'd like to turn things over to our APASA Steering Committee member, Michelle.
Thank you, Darlene and Diana, and thank you, Suresh. I've been filtering all the questions coming in through the Q&A, so that was a great segue to move into one of the questions that we received about your travels, and wondering if you've traveled to India often throughout the decades, and what has been your impressions from your visits there. How have you noticed things changing? How much have you been traveling? We'll just call it pre-pandemic times.
Yeah, I haven't been anywhere since the pandemic, but growing up, I went to India fairly often. Probably by the time I was 25, I'd been 9 or 10 times. Always to visit my grandparents, always getting to South India where we were from. And around that age is when I lost my last grandparent. And after that, I think I've only been to India a couple of times. I always liked going to India because we came from a community of farmers, and so not from a big city. And so you get to go to India and you'd live the simple life. You know, it was a slower pace. It was a different time, but I noticed by the time I went last time, I mean, it's a mess. You know, it's a busy, bustling place, and with modernization comes traffic, comes other things, and so I haven't found it as much fun recently. But I also haven't been in like 6-7 years. So
I happened to be lucky enough to go in 2015 to a wedding, and it took place, as you can imagine, all over India. I was only able to go to Delhi, the Delhi portion, but the groom is from Chennai. So I would have loved to have been able to see the southern side and the slower pace side.
It's not slow anymore. It used to be.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in comparison, I'm sure it would be a world difference. I also want to touch on your South Asian identity. This was a question that came in. Do you feel the need or pressure, a burden, however you want to call it, and being a spokesperson for the South Asian community and experience? How much of that plays into your presence and your role on different stages and spaces?
I don't, it's interesting. I think of my responsibility of representing UCSF well, representing UCSF Health well. But I think that anytime you have a heritage like mine, like ours, that is a minority heritage in a multicultural, diverse nation, but still a minority heritage, you always feel that responsibility. And you always want to represent yourself, your community well. I don't necessarily feel that I am particularly thoughtful on all the issues that are facing our community. And I don't necessarily keep myself up to date on latest opportunities for improvement. But that being said, I think from a straightforward, do I identify a responsibility to represent the community well? Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think just to touch on the point you just brought up, I think this also plays into the importance of having a great team surrounding you and your chief of staff and whoever that you work with. So it's important to have those folks and be in touch with what is going on in the front lines. There's been a lot of questions, I'll call concerns, just wanting to make sure that you have free time and wanting to learn more personal about you. And so there's questions about what do you do in your free time? Do you have a favorite book? I know we've talked about the Warriors. What are you looking forward to doing and being part of the Bay Area, going to a Warriors game? What's on your mind?
Yeah, it's been a long pandemic, even for suits like me. And so life's gotten a little out of balance and a lot more about work. Outside of work, I like playing tennis. I like live music. I like getting out to beaches, the mountains, the hills. So there's plenty to do in the Bay Area. If I can get out of work to do it, that'd be awesome. But really looking forward to it. Sports teams, I grew up a Niner fan, so it would be impossible to be a more serious Niner fan than me. I certainly like the Niners. I like the Warriors. Used to watch them when I was here 20 years ago in the Bay Area, almost courtside for like $20 because no one went to the games back then.
Was that in the Chris Mullen era or Tim Hardaway?
No, it was after Chris Mullen. So it was after Chris Mullen, Tim Hardaway. It was when Antoine Jameson played for the Warriors.
Ah, okay.
And like 12 people and myself went to the games. And so, but I still like the Warriors. So those are my teams.
That's good. That's good to hear. We want to make sure you can have free time to enjoy the Bay Area as well. I want to touch on another fact, a burning question that I think people are dying to better understand. In the fun facts shared about you, it says that you prefer iOS over Android. And as you can imagine, there's IT folks, there's a very strong preferences for both families of that. Please explain more as to why you prefer iOS, the Apple world.
Seriously? Yeah.
I mean, I use an iPhone, but
the simple reason is that I'm old and started using an iPhone, so the switching costs are pretty high. On a personal detail, I've always been, having worked in Silicon Valley and some of these things, I've always found the Steve Jobs story somewhat compelling in terms of how he thought about innovation. So I think that I was intrigued at the time that he came back to Apple and some of those things. So that's kind of why I got an iPhone in the first place. But other than that, no, I use an iPhone because I'm old and I'm too old to learn something new. So that's why I've got an iPhone.
Okay, thank you. I would say coming into a new role at UCSF Health is, I'm sure, plenty to learn. So I completely understand not wanting to pick up a new system. A couple more questions before we just close off. You mentioned really liking live music. We know you're a Counting Crows fan, and I personally will share, I have hype songs for myself and walk-on songs if I'm getting ready to do something to get me pumped up. Do you have a hype song or a song that you use? What do you do when you're getting ready to present on stage or for a big State of the Union? Are we frozen?
I think so.
Yeah. I think Suresh may have frozen.
Just give it a second here. There we go. He's back.
Was it me?
Hi. Do I need to repeat?
No, I don't
okay.
I don't have a hype song, but if I did, it would probably be by a relatively obscure artist called Chaos, K-O-S. And The Man I Used to Be would probably be my hype song. But no, when I'm giving presentations, and I'm somewhat of a professional presentation giver at this point, I think it's really important just to be very present in the moment and really think about who you're going to spend time with and what you're trying to say. So I don't really do hype songs.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to look up Chaos, as you mentioned, just to expand my musical repertoire. And so finally, just in closing, I wanted to ask if you have anything you would like to share. You've given a lot of great advice to us about looking at every step of our career into learning new skills, understanding nothing is ever truly linear, and taking advantage of situations and environments that present itself. What do you say to us here at UCSF as to how can we take your learnings and your lessons and apply that for ourselves?
Yeah, I think that I haven't figured it out. And but what I have figured out is that creating an environment where everyone feels like they belong, where we can lift up our people and put them in positions to succeed, is the easiest path to being the truly excellent place that we are. I mean, that we are an amazing medical school and we are an amazing health system. But if we want to be better, the engine that will make that possible is getting the most out of our people. And what I would say is there are lots of reasons we can look around and be pessimistic. Mm-hmm. You know, all of this violence that we're seeing in communities, this really polarizing talk, this return of significant disrespect, this notion that we are too busy, we see too many patients, we're out of space, we have too much work. You can look at any of these set of obstacles and say, I don't think we can do this. But I think the most powerful thing that I would encourage all of us to do it is, you know, you're probably right if you're thinking about it yourself. I can't fix those problems. I can't overcome that obstacle, but we certainly can. And if you look around this group of people that we have at UCSF, this is a pretty impressive group with a pretty strong track record. If we can't do this, who can? And I think that it's that and make the changes that are necessary, and then relying on one another to come up with plans that we can actually execute to get there is the formula. And so if there's one thing that I want everyone to understand, these are not problems that we're ever going to take for granted. But if we want to solve them, we have to work together and we have to commit to doing the work. I, for one, am happy to do that work. And I'm really optimistic because we've got an amazing team to get it done.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I absolutely agree that we can do better when we work together. And I love all the examples that you gave about things that you accomplished through your career. You said it was not you, it was me, and it was our team. And I think that's a great takeaway from our session today. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Diana to close out our session. Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to everyone participating in today's Fireside Chat. We just wanted to highlight a couple more events that are happening this month. There's one event actually this afternoon at Parnassus that will be in person, I believe, and two more events next week. The status of Asian Pacific Americans at UCSF, that will be on Monday, and Know My Name, the book club event on Tuesday the following week. We just want to once again thank Suresh for his time today, as well as his team, Cynthia and Eilish, who really helped us in organizing and planning for today, as well as our APASA partners, the UCSF, the AAPI Coalition, and the Benioff Children's Hospital DEI Council. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. If you want to connect with APASA, please sign up for our news and announcements, as well as joining us on MS Teams. With that, I want to wrap up and just thank my colleagues, Michelle Pang and Darlene Mergilano, for today's event, as well as support from Benjamin Wallen and Tiffany Chan. I'm thrilled that we were able to present to you our new president and CEO of UCSF Health, and we hope that you'll participate in some of the other API events for this month. Thank you again and have a good Friday. Bye.